Welcome to Questions from the Closet. I'm Ben Shalati.
And I'm Charlie Bird. From the comfort of our brand new couch, we are answering questions we commonly get asked as LGBTQ Latter-day Saints.
This podcast is now called Questions on the Couch.
Questions from the closet on the couch.
Where are we
We're
again?
not trying to answer these questions.
We're not trying to answer this question or come to a consensus, but simply share our perspectives. Today's question is: how do I explain how do I explain?
Well, I really threw you for a loop there, didn't I?
We're still going.
I love going off script.
How do I explain the church's stance on homosexuality?
So Ben and I are not terribly diverse, and we share many opinions and life experiences. For example, we've both written 2 books.
However, there are some pretty big differences. For example, Charlie wrote 2 full books. I wrote 1 full book and 8% of a book.
Tell us about the 8% of the book you wrote.
Well, I wrote an essay.
Is it not finished yet?
No, it's done. It's published. You can purchase it now. Deseret Book published it. It's called No Divisions Among You. Yeah, No Divisions Among You.
The rest is in the 92%.
Edited by Richard Eyre, and I wrote an essay called The Power of Proximity, about the power of proximity.
That's cool.
It was really good. It was about getting close to people who are different and hearing their stories.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, and I'm very proud of it. And we would like to provide a variety of voice and perspectives. So today we're joined by Kimberly Teitter.
What's up?
Kimberly, what do we have in common?
Do we have in common?
Yeah.
Well, we're both in the book.
We both worked on that book together.
Did you write more than 8%?
I don't know. I write so much. Shut me up. And then I don't turn things in on time. I'm the worst person.
Yours was like the right. Some of them got a little long, but yours felt like the right length.
Oh, good. That's so validating because I wrote a chapter in Why I Stay, and it was like the longest one. It was right in the middle, and I felt so bad. I'm like, if you let Black people talk in church more, then we wouldn't have to write really long things. But yeah, I guess 1/8 of the book is mine.
Roughly 8%.
That's awesome. Well, congratulations.
8%. Okay.
Yeah. So tell us what you wrote about in the book.
So my essay was called Rocky Ground, and I was talking about all of my fun gardening adventures in Utah and some of the things I took from that experience. I love growing things. I just feel like you learn so much from the land, and was sharing some of the lessons I learned about unity and how we can make things grow together, have more cooperation. So, yeah.
I thought it was good. Your essay was actually one of my favorites from the book.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, loved it. And tell us a little bit about you.
So I live in Salt Lake City. I have 2 daughters. I have been married for a long time. What year is this? 13 years. Wow. We have lived in Utah for 7 of those years. This is just a recent realization.
That's the majority of the years you've been married.
That's so sad because we were living in New York City when we first got married. Oh my gosh, like how far we have come. Anyway, so I work as a psychologist in a group practice in Salt Lake. My husband's a bishop and a principal of an elementary school.
Oh,
cool.
We have fun. I'm assistant director of a gospel choir that is down here.
What's the gospel choir?
It's Deborah Bonner Unity Gospel Choir. Yes.
Oh my gosh, I have some friends in that.
Oh, you do?
Yeah, that's so fun. Well, I don't want to
Oh, okay.
We'll
fine.
talk later.
Oh, okay.
Maybe they got kicked out.
Oh,
they better be good singers.
Oh, yeah. We secretly let everyone in.
That's really cool.
Because Deborah believes anyone can sing. We got a concert coming up on September 22nd.
Oh, that's amazing. Oh, congratulations.
Yeah.
We're super happy to have you on this episode. Today we're talking about kind of an interesting question, but it's probably one of the most common we get from LGBTQ church members and allies. Like, how do you explain the church's stance on homosexuality?
And honestly, when I give firesides, this question is asked probably half the time.
So we're kind of going to dig into it. I feel like it's going to be pretty free form. Let's just see where it goes.
Yeah. First, I want to find out, Kimberly, what's your connection to the LGBTQ space?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, so you want the long or the short?
Give us a 2-minute version.
Give us the 8%.
Okay. So I've written about this somewhere. I feel like the Lord kind of called me to compassion for the queer community specifically. I was reading when I was in middle school. I read an article about Harvey Milk High School, and I was like, oh yeah, this makes sense. And it was kind of weird because I grew up in North Carolina. There were no gay people there. But I was just like, oh yeah, this makes sense. Like, gay people need a safe space. And I went to graduate school and kind of landed on queer and religious intersections. And so I initially wanted to study like what happens when there's these like value conflicts among therapists who don't want to work with queer people. So that was a hot topic at the time, and I figured there just needed to be like some kind of bridge built to where people could understand and maybe train them up to do different things. But then I was told that that was the wrong side of the issue, and it probably was for the time. So I then studied just the experiences of queer religious peoples. They were mostly LDS. Came out to Utah, did a lot of interviews. And then, yeah, there I stayed, did a lot of networking, get involved with affirmation and all of the various like umbrella organizations.
Yeah.
Just been kind of kicking around with them for some time. Yeah.
That's great.
Fantastic. All right. Well, should we read the newsroom article?
Yeah. Do you want to start with that?
Yeah. Why don't we
So I was like, I wonder what the church's like most recent official stance is. And I don't know when this was published. My gut is telling me it was more recent because I hadn't read this before. And I'm usually pretty on top of things. And I actually thought it was pretty well written.
Yeah.
Compared to, I mean, that's my personal opinion. But maybe we should just kind of like read through it and like pause me whenever you want.
Yeah, and this is a church newsroom article, so this is like outward facing. This is meant for journalists, people writing about the church to get information about the church, its beliefs, what the comings and goings are. And there's a different same-sex attraction topic on the church website, on churchofjesuschrist.org, and this is newsroom.churchofjesuschrist.org.
Okay, so it says the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints acknowledges that same-sex attraction is a sensitive issue and that requires kindness, compassion, and understanding. Honestly, even right there, that's like so much different from what I grew up with.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so much different from even like 5 years ago. Like that's a beautiful sentence.
Uh-huh.
So
I'd say 5 years ago we were probably in this space, but
I don't think so. No, I don't think so at all.
5 years ago?
I
I
think
would
we're
say
getting there.
so.
There's
Anyway.
been so many hills and valleys. Anyway,
Yeah.
continue.
The same-sex attraction section of churchofjesuschrist.org reinforces the reality that, in the words of one Latter-day Saint scripture, God loveth his children, and seeks to help everyone better understand same-sex attraction from a gospel perspective. Again, like that focus on love, I think is really important, especially for people to read. I've talked to so many moms, like their kid comes out and immediately they just Google this, and I love that this is what they're reading first.
Yeah.
So,
You don't want to continue reading?
Yeah.
Okay. The church does not take a position on the cause of same-sex attraction. In 2006, Elder Dallin H. Oak said, "The church does not have a position on the causes of any of these susceptibilities or inclinations, including those related to same-gender attraction." I would use some different words there, but it was 2006.
do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I just don't love the words susceptibilities or inclinations. I
Yeah.
would prefer orientation, but this was 2006.
Yeah, I think that this is an important point you make because there's so many things where people can speak with still the same like prejudices and things that people have about queer people, you know, to even a word like susceptibility is like it's some dark force that like infiltrates. And so even if you're saying that you're not like saying a cause or something like that, you are when you use certain language. And so I like that there's the capacity to like shift how we think about it, or room for openness about like, am I really assuming a cause when I say things
Yeah.
in certain
Well, and I
ways?
think this is a question a lot of people have, like, why am I this way, or why is my family member this way? Like, what is the cause? I've shifted away from that personally. I don't really care what the cause was. Well, I believe the cause was that this is part of how God created me. So that's what I think. But at least, you know, I grew up reading that the cause was anything, you know, like there was a ton of like even psychological research or like theories about the distant mother, or the distant father, the overbearing mother, the pornography, the this, the that. And it's so, even this, I'm like actually somewhat impressed by, given what I grew up reading.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. All right. The next paragraph is great. It says, "Feelings of same-sex attraction are not a sin." President M. Russell Ballard said, now this quote I'm about to read, I actually share in every presentation I give on the topic. He said, "Let us be clear. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints believes that the experience of same-sex attraction is a complex reality for many people. The attraction itself is not a sin, but acting on it is. Even though individuals do not choose to have such attractions, they do choose how to respond to them. With love and understanding, the church reaches out to all of God's children, including those with same-sex attraction." So I always point out the principles he shares here. This is a complex reality. This is something that's real, that they're not chosen, but we still have agency in how we respond to whatever circumstance we're in. And as a church, we should be reaching out with love and understanding. And so I would really love every member of the church to ponder, what would that look like in my sphere, in my family, in my ward, in my stake, to reach out with love and understanding to God's LGBTQ children or people who experience same-sex attraction.
yeah. And just thinking like, if this is more for like responding to someone coming out, I guess, but I feel like if someone comes out to you and you're like, well, this isn't a sin, but if you act on it, it is. That like sounds really, that's like really loaded. Just so everyone knows, like acting on it for a lot of queer people, myself included, that phrase doesn't really represent how I actually feel about it. Like it's not some like room in a house I can lock up and never enter. It's just like kind of like this ever flowing part of my being. And so I think that can kind of be stifling to someone. However, I do love this language of you choose how you respond to this. And so I just a quick plug, I feel like it would have been much better for me to hear, like feeling this way is not a sin and you get to choose how you respond to this. I feel like that's a much more empowering, agency honoring way to approach this. And I'd love to hear more of that, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you want to read the next one?
Yes. While same-sex attraction is not a sin, it can be a challenge. While one may not have chosen to have these feelings, he or she or they, anyway, can commit to keep God's commandments. The parent of a child who experiences same-sex attraction or identifies as gay, the first mention of gay.
I know, yeah, here we go.
Should choose to love and embrace that child. As a community of church members, Latter-day Saints should create a welcoming environment. All right.
That's pretty good.
That's nice, huh?
I'm into it.
Something I've said often is that like, for me, what did I say that?
You said that I don't struggle with same-sex attraction. I struggle with other people
struggling with same-sex attraction. I think a lot of times the challenge isn't so much that you're gay. It's that you're gay in a society that has preconceived notions about you, or that you feel distant from God, or you feel like something is inherently wrong. There's these like underlying issues that rise up because of how other people view it. So that's just another thing that I would take note of. This is interesting. This is not the direction I thought this would go so far.
Oh, we've got more to say.
We've got a lot more to say.
I think I'm in Hamlet.
All right, take it away, Kimberly.
Okay, those who experience same-sex attraction or identify as gay, can fully participate in the church. As a church policy says, if members feel same-sex attraction and are striving to live the law of chastity, leaders support and encourage them in their resolve. These members may receive church callings, hold temple recommends, and receive temple ordinances if they are worthy. Male church members may receive and exercise the priesthood. The circumstances of some faithful members do not allow them to receive the blessings of eternal marriage and parenthood in this life. They will receive all promised blessings in the eternities, provided they keep the covenants they have made with God. Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah. Which is, honestly, I think that shows that we strive to be welcoming, loving, kind. Gay members can participate in church, and I think that's great.
Yeah, I think it was important to go through that because that is the current church's stance on homosexuality, like the outward-facing stance.
Yeah.
And I think that's especially cool. Just like I said, I think one of the issues that is hard for people explaining the church's stance is that it's evolved over time. It's changed. You said there's been a lot of hills and valleys. And even in my lifetime, I've heard different things. There's been policies that were enacted and then retracted. And it's interesting because I've noticed that I've always been, ever since I like found this in myself, I've been so on top of what's been happening. But a lot of people in my life and a lot of people in life general aren't really on top of it. So they just like grab onto what they hear. And some of these things that people have grabbed onto were like in the 60s, the 70s, or in 2015, and they like stay there. They don't like seek or have like proximity to the new knowledge. And so I personally think that one of the reasons why like there's this like church's stance issues because people think the church has a lot of different stances. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. And I think, this is a lovely explanation of, how we're loving and kind and people are welcome and parents should love and support their kids. Like that's all really well and good. And I hope that we strive to do all those things. But I think the question people actually have, like if they're like, help me understand the church's stance on homosexuality, it's about gay marriage. And, why doesn't the church allow gay marriage? That's the question that's like my relatives who aren't members of the church want to know because they're concerned about it. Or the youth who have like gay friends, they're like, well, why do I get to date but my friend doesn't get to?
Yeah, for sure.
And I think that's the like the really.
Well, I wouldn't say doesn't get to. I would say maybe that's what they say, but like doesn't get to with the same you know, because everyone can do whatever they want. Like, you know.
I think this is where it gets into the gray area where it's like, oh, it's okay as long as somebody lives the law of chastity. Or it's the same thing with like being at BYU. We're like, oh, you live the law of chastity, or you refrain from homosexual behavior. And then people be like, well, what is homosexual behavior? Is it like holding hands? Is it going on dates? And so there's a lot of things that for straight people you wouldn't consider to be violations of the law of chastity, but for queer people it's different,
Like
and
no
it's
one's
nebulous.
sure.
So people don't want to define it, and people don't really want to get into
And people
it.
define it differently.
Yeah.
And
so it just puts like a little cloud over people who are, I think, really are trying to do the right thing.
Yeah, I think most of the time this question's coming from like an equality standpoint of like, how come some people get to have meaningful, loving relationships and that's honored and respected and encouraged, but if you're gay, you don't. And that is a hard thing to chew on.
Yeah. And I think we should also acknowledge that there are plenty of people in mixed orientation marriages or people with same-sex attraction who are married to someone of the opposite sex and have like love and wonderful marriages. But I do think that's the question. It's like you know, why no gay marriage?
What's the deal here?
That's what people want to know. So I don't know what you all have experienced, but I experienced growing up people giving a lot of reasons for why. And those reasons, if I could summarize them, would be that in marriage, there are marital roles that husbands have, that wives have, that are different.
Gender roles.
And so with gender roles, if you have two men or two women, then those roles can't be fulfilled. Also, gay people can't have children the same way that heterosexuals can. And well, there's a third one.
Like spirit children up in heaven?
That there are spirit children in heaven that won't come down. Yeah, but I think this idea that we have a Heavenly Mother and a Heavenly Father, and if we want to
become like them,
if we want to be like them, then we need to be in the kind of marriage relationship that they are.
Yeah.
People would engage in a lot of fear mongering too, like homosexual agenda is threatening to destroy our marriages, and like a lot of things that, especially now we know with the research, just aren't true about like the dangers of, or
Like
the
gay
likelihood
parenting.
of, gay parenting dangers, or like susceptibility to sexual abuse, just all of these things that were not true, but things that I used to hear were more likely.
Well, even those are even things I used to say, honestly. I remember someone we were teaching on my mission asked me about this, and I was in Southern California, and I told him, I told her, I was like, oh, it's because there needs to be a male and a female parent, and that's the only way to like, because it halts, I told her that it halts the plan of salvation, because that's what I've been told, you know, and that's what I was telling myself, like, I can't be gay because I don't want to halt the plan of salvation. But it is interesting, like, it's almost as if there's like this question that, well, actually too, I wanted to note with what you said about like gender roles. I think in the younger generations, gender roles are evolving and or aren't as important to people. Like that strictly, this is what it means to be a man, this is what it means to be a female. And I think that's where some of these questions are coming up more and more. Like, why is this such a big deal? And I feel like I've even heard people argue, well, we still like, between the two of us, we still have like, are really well rounded across like tasks and whatever, like marriage.
Yeah.
Things. Anyway, so that's just.
Yeah, and I think the issue when we try and explain why something is the way it is, that you can always poke holes in that. Like whatever it is, you can always poke holes in it.
Right.
And so I spent a lot of time just like really thinking about and pondering out each one of those reasons, and kind of coming to the conclusion, like in the end, they don't all hold water. But so where I try and go to is, okay, I don't need a logical explanation. I need to go to God and find out what God wants for me. And that for me has been much more powerful than someone like explaining to me why things are the way they are.
Yeah. It seems like there's this nebulous thing that actually has changed a lot over time. The church's stance has shifted. And as people try to explain that, it, like you said, it almost always falls short.
I really like that the focus now, like if you look in the handbook, the first thing it says is to reach out with love and understanding. And here I thought I was going to come in on vanguard, like, that's the church's stance on homosexuality. Love God, love your neighbor. But truly, I think that is like
it's kind of the direction we're
best
headed.
way to describe the church's stance on homosexuality is that we're supposed to love people. And I think that if we loved people, as fully as the Lord wanted us to, then we would be more thoughtful about the way that we were treating people in all kinds of ways. So, like, if we believe something like, oh, somebody's got to be straight so that they don't thwart the plan of salvation or whatever, or they have to get married in this way, then it is kind of leaving out, your single people of like all kinds, right, that never get married. And like, there's just so many ways that we have to cultivate
Or the
compassion.
infertile couples,
right?
like there always
Like,
is an
are they
addendum where
thwarted? And it's, there's clear examples where people are like, oh yeah, no, we're not
not
talking
them,
about
just
them.
the gays.
But yeah, and it just really highlights where we need to continuously cultivate compassion for people.
So Ben, I'm gonna ask you a difficult question, okay?
Okay.
It's going back to what you were saying earlier about how
Already sweating.
It's hot in here today.
it is kind of hot in here today. You were talking about how like it's best to just go to God and get the answer for yourself, which I completely agree with. But with that, do you think that the church's stance on homosexuality can be different from God's stance on homosexuality?
I don't think it. I don't really want to answer that question. I just don't think it's very helpful.
Well, it's a lot. I hear that a lot. Like that's a common question. I'm trying to think of how I would answer that.
Well, 'cause I think for many, probably most church members, like what the church does and what God does and thinks are the same thing.
Yeah.
And
And
we know that they haven't been over history. I mean, like, I hate to be the black girl in the room, but like when, in the Book of Mormon musical, we were like, oh, in 1978, God changed his mind about black people. Like, do we really think that that was the case, or do we think that people were doing stuff?
well, so I would say this. I really believe in an ongoing restoration. Like, and I think we've seen that. And also President Nelson has talked very strongly about how good inspiration comes from good information. And so in my mind, it kind of goes back to what you were saying about the power of proximity, that 8% of the book you wrote. I think when you have proximity to people, you're asking different questions, you're looking at different things, and God is able to open up new channels with you. And I personally feel like that's kind of what's happened with homosexuality in the LGBTQ community, because as more people come out and stay in the church and are willing to enter this kind of like this tension of having conversations, of letting people, of just like coming with open palms, other people like leaders, whether that's local or church-wide leaders, are getting more information, then are able to ask better questions. And I personally believe that that's why there's been this shift from 60s, 70s, 80s till now. This, because really back in the day it was like no, and now it's like let's love them. And so I guess under that, guys, then yes, because what we're getting from God now, this new like ongoing restored view of God's gay children, is different than it looked in the 40 years ago.
Yeah,
Right.
definitely. And God will continue to bless us with further light and knowledge
Yeah.
as well.
I also don't think that means like, I think people get scared because then that means like, oh, the church isn't true. Like, I believe this is God's restored church on the earth. And like, how exciting to be part of the restoration.
I agree. I feel like we have to be open to further light and knowledge on things. Like, I think about people that haven't been open to all kinds of changes that have been made, not just blacks in the priesthood, but even the reversing of the, how do we call it?
The November
Policy.
2015 policy.
Thank you. Or, I don't know, wearing masks at church. Like, there's just so many ways that our own lack of openness prevents us from being open to how God is working. And I kind of see, like, I don't know, we can also develop our relationship with God as well. You were talking about proximity with people, but like, we also need proximity with God, because I just picture the whole thing as like, I don't know, we're in a big game of telephone with God, when it comes to
Yeah.
receiving revelation. And I think that there have been plenty of times where like we're just trying to figure out what a divine being would do, and we are like, we're divine beings, sure, but we're like on earth, and we got to figure out the best way to do stuff. And through continuous collaboration and what do you call it when it comes like
Communication?
this? Yeah, sure, that's not the word I was looking for, but yeah, with communication with God, then things get more clear over time. And so like with the shift in how we respond first with love as opposed to a boundary with our queer siblings, I think is a really clear example of that.
I would also say it's really important to recognize and honor priesthood keys, because I mean, I can talk to God about revelation for me and my orientation and my life path, but I can't expect the church to have the same answers,
or to tell someone else what,
or to tell anyone else, right? Because that's so I think that's another area where it kind of that gets tripped up or gets muddled, because the only person that has the priesthood keys to affect change in the church is like the prophet, right? And like the first presidency and the 12 apostles hold those keys. And so like any shift or changes that come is not going to be from like me it's not going to be my prayers. Like it's going to be theirs. It's not my information that's changing the church. So I guess what I'm trying to say, if there is a shift or a change in the church that aligns it more to God's will, it's going to be through the prophet. And what it is right now is what the prophets received. So that's what it is right now. Mm-hmm. And that's the law that we're called to live, Yeah.
So I'd like to shift the conversation a bit to how we respond when we get asked this question by people. So this is a story I've told before, but in 2016, I moved in. No, it was before then. Anyway, when I was living in Tucson, I lived for a year and a half with 2 retired lesbians. And they were retired professionally, not from being lesbians. And when I moved in, they were very...
I've heard you make that joke
I know.
Probably 300 times.
I was like, why didn't you do anything?
I'm like...
Anyway.
It always gets a laugh in a fireside. But longtime listeners will be familiar with that joke. Anyway, they were very confused as to why I was part of this church as a gay person. And so very kindly, the lady who opened the house, the one who owned the house, she said, "Ben, how can you be part of this church?" basically. And I said, "Well, I believe the Book of Mormon. It's changed my life." I said all these spiritual things that had been impactful to me. And her eyes just kind of glazed over. That wasn't impactful to her. And then I said this. I said, "I want to make my congregation the most welcoming and loving and kind place it can be. And if you two ever want to come to church, there's always room for you on the pew next to me. And if anyone gives you any guff, they're going to have to deal with me." And that really meant a lot to them. I could see that be a meaningful thing to them. And and later, as we talked about, the November 2015 policy happened while I was living with them. Mm. And I remember them, I think it happened. Yeah. And so they were asking me a lot about that. And I just said, "I don't know. This doesn't make sense to me." And I just said, I don't know. It doesn't make sense to me. And that worked for them to hear, we can trust you that this doesn't make sense to you, but also you love this community. You want to make it the best place. Mm-hmm. And then they saw all the work I did in Tucson. We had ally nights at my house. We had LGBTQ gatherings at my house, and they just bragged about their gay Mormon friend who was making his church a better place. And so I think that if the words we say don't matter as much as what people see us do. Mm-hmm. And so if we're saying, well, the church's stance is to be loving and kind, then we need to let people see us do that.
Loving, kind, visible love and support.
Yeah. And if not just with our words, with our actions, let's be seen being loving and kind to LGBTQ people like we proclaim we should be.
Yeah, I love that point, because I think about, especially with this shift to home-centered and church-supported endeavors, in my mind, I'm like, well, that means we got to be on the ground doing more church support more than ever. I've heard people, kind of interpret that oh, yeah, I'm going to, especially, here in Utah, I'm going to be up here with my families, and we're not going to spend as much time engaged in church activity because it's all about the home. And I was like, what about the people that don't have homes, don't have people that they live with, don't have stable home situations? The church has got to be there for those people. And so I love this approach of we can be on the ground being the Lord's hands, because with the situation the November 2015 policy, those kids, those families needed love more than ever, even with the policy being in place. So, it didn't make sense to me. And for a while, I couldn't engage with people in the same ways because it just felt bad on every side. I couldn't. Anyway, it was just a complicated time. But what was clearest to me is these people need love more than ever. And so we got to be there for them.
Which is something that I saw, honestly, the fruits from that policy that I saw on the ground level was more people reaching out, more people opening up, and more people saying, "Hey, I actually don't know much about this, so I'm going to find out." So it's interesting.
Yeah, and I would give firesides and fifth Sunday lessons during the time the November 15 policy was still in place, and people would be really upset, and they would say, "I just don't understand why the church would do this. Can you explain it to me?" And I would say, "I can't either. It doesn't
Can't
make sense to
explain
me
it.
either." And I would say, "Help me understand why it doesn't make sense to you." And then
Smart.
just getting them talking, and we could share about it, and we could say, this doesn't make sense. It doesn't fit or feel right. And yet, how are we going to engage with God? How are we going to move forward?
Yeah, I love that because I feel like the church's stance isn't something for us to explain. And I don't even know if it's something for us to defend either. Like the church's stance is going to be the church's stance. And how are you exemplifying Christ in your interactions with people?
I love that.
I love that. Like, why doesn't it make sense to you? And have that conversation. Then you can like
Then it's
build a relationship.
connecting that,
Yeah, that's the connection.
Because I think what we do in these kinds of cases too much is we invalidate the person's concern.
We invalidate
Yeah.
or we try to explain it away.
Yeah. So I have this concern, like, well, here's the answer to your concern.
Yeah, too quick to problem solving before knowing the things.
And we do that a lot with the youth. And the youth want solid answers like, well, why this or why this or why this? And like, well, here's the answer. And they want to walk away like, okay, I get it.
But if the answer doesn't make sense to the youth, then that's gonna like reflect on the whole church, right? Like, in a lot of like, there's been this shift as we're switching to home-centered, church-supported, and like everything's been about personal revelation and being able to listen to the Spirit. Like even the conference talks, I've been listening to older conference talks, and the older conference talks are about exact obedience, and the more recent ones are about looking to God because there's too many voices. And so there's this shift where this, that generationally, the youth aren't going to accept whatever answer you're saying. They're going to be like, no. They're going to push back. They're going to ask questions, and I think that's really healthy. And that's why explaining it away isn't going to work. So,
And what I love about what you did is like a lot of times teenagers, this is therapist hat talking. A lot of times teenagers need that emotional modeling, because there's so much going on in their brains, right? And I have really benefited in my life from examples of faithful people who can like model holding complexity and faith at the same time. When this policy came out, I was in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and we had a great bishop there who also modeled this same, like, I don't know, that doesn't make sense to me either. And it just made me feel like I could like sit down and have a place still because, in that situation where you're trying to figure out how you feel about something, all the explanations in the world don't really land. You need somebody to sit with you and be where you are. So
yeah, that's interesting because I'm remembering when the policy change happened, when that policy happened in 2015. I was attending a Spanish branch in Tucson that got dissolved, got joined with another one, and I just started going to a family ward after that. So I was in a brand new ward, and so one of my first Sundays there was the first Sunday in December 2015. It was fast and testimony meeting, and so this was the first time people could talk publicly about what had happened in November. And so one woman got up and just talked about how hard it had been, and then another, and I don't even know who these people were because it was one of my first Sundays in the ward. And then another woman got up and just bore her testimony of it. And it just felt so uncomfortable. Like someone had expressed pain and then someone just said, "Oh, I know what happened is true." And I remember thinking, I just remember like sitting there tense because no one knew I was gay. Like I was brand new. But that ward ended up being like the best place for me, but that was a really tense moment for me. And I wish there could have been a little more modeling, like you said, of someone saying, this doesn't make sense, or maybe it does make sense, and yet this makes perfect sense to me, but I want to understand why it doesn't make sense for you, which that wouldn't happen in a testimony meeting. Like that doesn't fit in that context. But I think when that kind of thing happens, it can be really powerful.
yeah, well, and we have through our baptismal covenants and our confirmation, we have the Spirit to be with us, and the Spirit is the comforter, right? So our words, the way we interact with people, should be comforting to them. And that reminds me, Ben, almost as if like somebody's close family member passes away and they're like really upset about it, and you're just like, well, you'll see him again. It's just like, even if it's true, there's just this utter lack of comfort, like this lack of seeing somebody and taking the time to like mourn with them as they're mourning. And a lot of people do mourn the church's stance on gay marriage, and rather than just passing that by, we have to mourn with them. Whether or not you believe it's true, like we're not covenanted. I don't know, like our covenant to be a covenant keeping people and stay on the covenant path is to mourn with those that mourn.
Right. I was going to say we're being called to do that. It just kind of weirds me out sometimes. I respect where people are at when they feel the need to defend the stances of the church or do this, that, and the other. But like y'all are saying, when people have expressed pain, I feel like that's the time to drop it and be like, okay, well, what can I do for you? And people.
I love you.
Drop it. Stop it. As Victor said. I don't know. It's just strange to me that, and people will make it about, I don't know. I have many people that I grew up with in my hometown that are very worried about me. And it's like, man, I'm good. I pray every day. Like, I love the prophet. He's my man. Sometimes I need to help to figure things out. And, you standing with a slightly ajar door and closing it does not bring me into community or fellowship or understanding. And so it's just an interesting response to me that I respect, because people love the church and they don't want to see it, go astray. But I think we need to have more faith in the Lord and the direction that he's leading the church. Like, whatever side you decide to take on it, we got to have more faith and so that we can have the courage to be there for people when they're struggling.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to understand, when someone asks like what is the church's stance on homosexuality, where are they coming from? What's the motivation behind that? Because I had a good friend when I was also living in Tucson. This was my first semester at the University of Arizona, and I was giving a colleague a ride home. I was 28. I wasn't out to him. I wasn't out publicly. And he was like, so you're Mormon. Like, what do Mormons think about gay marriage? And I said some things. He's like, okay, thank you for sharing. And at the time I wouldn't have said, it doesn't make sense to me. I said, well, this is what we believe as a church. And he was just like, thank you. He was just curious, and I eased his curiosity. But he wasn't trying to look for a church or anything like that. He just wanted to know what the teachings were. And I remember specifically going home, and I had quoted to him part of the Family Proclamation, and I went home and looked up the Family Proclamation, was going to email that line I had quoted to him, and it wasn't there.
You quoted it wrong.
Yeah. And I was like, oh, I have misunderstood what this document said.
The Family Proclamation has so many ghost lines.
Yeah,
it does.
I went and read it for the first, as a woman, sometimes I'm like, ugh, I'm not going to read this. As a working woman, I should say. I don't want to read it. It's all attacks. And then when I moved to Utah, I went to the exhibit or whatever, and it has it on display, and I'm like, okay. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it doesn't say what I thought it said. And it's so, I don't know. So many ghost lines.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, that's very true. And so I think it's important to wonder, is this genuine curiosity someone has? Or are they just being polite? Or is there pain coming from this and a real desire to heal or a significant concern? I was speaking to a group of youth once, and a youth in tears asked me about this. I have a gay brother, and I want him to be able to get married and have a family. And I just don't understand why the church won't allow him to have a temple recommend and participate fully in the church if he does those things. And what I said was, I can tell you love your brother so much, and he is so lucky to have you. And the church's position doesn't make sense to me, and it's something that I wrestle with, that you're clearly wrestling with. And so let's keep wrestling with this question and concern together.
And again, I think God wants us to wrestle. I think the Holy Ghost is a comforter. That means we're supposed to be in tension. We're supposed to be in, it just makes sense that we're here to wrestle with things and grow and learn. Okay, so I'm kind of in a precarious position because I did get married. I got gay married, and it's true. I don't know if millions of people know that.
I'm sure millions don't know.
Away.
Yeah, I mean,
thousands of people know.
Well, our engagement video on my Instagram has almost 1 million views.
Anyway, the numbers
I'm just saying.
Yeah.
So let's talk about a band. Let's talk about it. Anyway, so
and if it's 1 million, that's still not millions.
Oh,
but
shoot.
it was also in the Deseret News.
Oh,
that's true. It was.
Oh,
Okay.
that's
And-
kind of
And
It
catch me
made
up.
really.
Deseret News.
Yeah.
What kind of comments were? Oh, not the
no,
topic,
we'll get
but
you
go
there.
ahead, go
I
ahead.
forgot about that. Anyway,
Fine.
so a lot of people know that you were getting gay
Many
married.
people know I
and
got
you
gay married, right? And it's kind of put me in this precarious position because, well, first of all, I don't know. One of the reasons I wanted to get married was because of the way I was raised, with this value of chastity and waiting till marriage and having marriage. And so it's kind of weird because the beliefs that I grew up with were the reason I wanted to get married rather than cohabitate or anything else, right? And also it contradicts the church's stance on gay marriage. Like, I went against the church's stance on gay marriage, and I realized that I did that. I did that like knowingly, which is a weird thing to say. It's a weird thing for people to understand. Anyway,
You ate the fruit.
I ate the fruit. Yeah. And well, and one, like, and I still, with that, people expect me to hate the church because I got married, but that's not true. Like, that's black and white thinking. Just because someone agrees or disagrees with one thing doesn't mean they hate or love the thing as a whole, right? So I love the church, and I respect the religious freedom of the church to have a different stance on gay marriage than I personally have. And I also interact with the gospel and the church, and I'm like attending church every week. Like, it's not so one side or the other, which I think is important to understand. I don't know why I felt important to make that point, but just understand if someone disagrees or does agree with the church's stance on homosexuality, it's not always a threat. We so quickly go to like, oh, this is a threatening person, and you must hate the thing that I love. That's not true. But main point of the story is there's someone in my life who's close to me, who has kind of been struggling oppositely, because they're struggling with how accepted I've been from getting married. They've struggled with some of the people that came to my wedding, that hold church positions. And so they're struggling with the church's position on gay marriage because it's too lax, because I'm being too supported in this decision. And I just think it's really interesting, that inverse way, because there's some people who it really is an uncomfortable thing for them, or the way they've been raised, or the things that they've been taught really make them like disgusted by the thought of a gay married couple. And we just gotta hold more space for people. Like, and like at first I was like, how dare they? That's so offensive. And I'm like, you know what? They just don't know. And I'm just gonna keep going to church, and I'm gonna do what I feel like is right for my life. And
Charlie, what does that look like for you to hold space for this person that disagrees and is disgusted by your choice?
It looks like that.
It looks like that. It looks like deer in the headlights. Honestly, I feel angry on the surface level, but when I sift through it, I feel misunderstood, and then I feel a lot of compassion for this person, because it makes me think, what about, maybe this is bad, I don't know, poke holes in this, but like, what about their choices do they hate and they can't get over? And I think, you know what? The last thing Christ ever did as he was being murdered was forgive his murderers, and say they don't know, they don't have all the information, and so I'm going to forgive them. And so I'm like, I don't want to hold on to that. And I really want to model compassion in this space where there historically hasn't been. And I think by doing this, by admitting what we don't know and still going there anyway, I think that's faith. That's what faith is, you know? I don't know. There's some thoughts on that.
I feel like, everybody's choices puts them on different paths, and sometimes those paths make it hard to understand or connect, and that's painful. And so I appreciate that you are leaving room for people, and it is,
Well, I think it's practical. Like, some people are upset with the church's stance because they want their brother to be able to get married and have full fellowship in the church. And other people are upset with the church's stance because they're saying this isn't a choice. It goes against, like, the church is taking, in some ways, a more progressive stance for some people, for some countries, for some continents, and that can be difficult as well. And if it changes, then it changes. And if it doesn't, then we all have to figure out how to live in that.
I always say, if nobody's happy, it's probably good. But I thought of so many things when you were talking. First of all, like on the last point, like it's been interesting for me as a psychologist. There's like this, the division that does LGBTQ research and the division that does religious research. For the last few years, they've had this task force, and they like get together and have conversations about religious and queer intersections. And I remember one year, it was before 2015. It was the time where the church had like out here passed the law in support of like not housing discrimination or something.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I had
The Utah
present-
Compromise, it's called.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you. So I presented this to this group, this task force. And so I don't know, it's always weird being a Mormon on like a religious task force. It's like a bunch of Christians.
Yeah, they're like, "Who are
There's
you?"
like already Christian Mormon tension. And sure enough, when I shared that, like, oh, the church had done this thing, somebody from the religious division that was Christian was like, well, who says that's a good thing? And I was like, oh, okay. Like, I didn't even think about, especially like in recent years, sometimes I've wondered if we are losing our status as peculiar people, because sometimes it feels like we want to fit in with like what other Christian churches are doing,
Yeah.
or like what other people are saying. And so yeah, it was interesting in that point in time to have this like peculiar moment where it's like
Yeah.
nobody really liked it.
Well, and I mean, something you've said a couple times, Ben, is like in other Christian denominations, being gay means going to hell. And in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, being gay, even being gay married, means going to a lower level of heaven. So at some levels, like compared to the Southern Baptist religions where I grew up, and compared to Islam and different sects all over the world, like we have a more positive, loving stance. And that's weird to chew on, especially if you grew up here. And I don't know. It's just complex. It is
Yeah.
complex. And
I think that one of the people will often criticize the church for talking about same-sex attraction or same-sex behavior, but I think that one of the more like, is progressive a swear word? Can we not say this? One of the more like
forward thinking.
Christ-like?
Yeah, sure.
Christ-like.
Yes, one of the more Christ-like things is that it did leave this nuance in things where it's not just black and white, like, oh, you have a gay feeling, you go to hell. It's like, oh, there's all these levels of experience that really in the therapy world were being mirrored by people having more curiosity about like, oh, it's not just like you're gay and so it's just like this one life jump. And I think that talking about attraction, behavior, experiences, identity, all of these things really leaves room in our religious tradition for people to think about how they would show love at each of these levels of experience. And like you were saying before, it's hard to think about it on a binary if you recognize that there's so many different paths that put different choice points in front of you. Like, you didn't just decide because you got married that you're donezo with the church, like because you have a religious identity that's important to you. And so I don't know, there's nuance.
As I've been thinking about this, you know, if someone were to ask me like right now what the church's stance on homosexuality is, I would say something like, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints teaches that we should love God and love our fellow men. And what I am called to do as a disciple of Christ is to make space for everyone and to love them. And I need to go to God to find out how I operationalize that, what loving that person looks like. And that means creating space for people, making them active participants in my life as much as they want to be. And and there are hard questions that I don't have answers to, that things that don't feel right to me. But what I do know is that I am called to love people. And this has been both like hard and wonderful for me at the same time, is that my reality stretches people in how they love. Because I create tension for people by my existence.
Yeah, just by being gay, just by existing.
And that's both hard for me, and also I think it's kind of cool.
Yeah, it's a great blessing, and we need people like that in the world, because I want to learn how to love more. I hope there's people in my life that stretch my capacity to love. And I hope that other people's existences make me uncomfortable. Just kidding. That sounds bad.
I mean, you already said that.
Well, and then just another thought I had, but there are also like practical answers to this too. Like, what is the church's stance on gay marriage? The church doesn't support gay marriage. But like there also is agency. So people can choose to get married, like gay couples can exist. And there are like certain membership restrictions, and that can vary depending on local leadership and individual and couple circumstances. And that's practical, and that just is the answer. And there's pain in that, and there's confusion in that. And so with that pain and with that confusion, you do what you were saying, like drop the explanations, just mourn with those that mourn, and figure it out. And I just think that's, if like God is saying that's where we need to be, and Christ emulated that in his ministry, and the prophet is saying that's where we need to be, then I want to be there. You know, that's where I want to be.
Yeah. I remember my first friend that got gay married. I had like a similar conversation with a friend about whether we were going to go to the wedding. And like, I don't know, it was just this weird amalgamation of like pulling Christ's behavior and being like, well, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And I was like, I think that Jesus would be there. And my friend was like, really? And I was like, I don't know. But I will say I did go, and my friend, like, I would have missed a beautiful witness of his faith had I not gone, because a lot of the vows that they chose to share with each other were about like mourning with each other and showing comfort and all of these things that I'm like, yeah, these resonate with me as gospel principles. And so, yeah, it is a weird thing to have people tested by you being there. And I felt weird even to think about that story driving down here, because I'm like, I don't know, it should have been so obvious, but it wasn't.
If you don't know, you don't know. You do the best you can with the knowledge you have, and when you get more knowledge, you do better. And I think that's what we as a Zion people are doing.
Yeah, I think it's
and for that reason, I think it's important that people come out. I think it's important that people stay, if they choose to and if they want to, stay involved and claim the spaces they belong to and claim the beliefs and hold them, because that's how we get more knowledge. Ben, can I poke fun at you for a second?
Of course, always.
Sometimes there's like a couple moms, and the mom's always like, you just love. The answer is just love. And Ben's always like, what do you mean the answer is just love? Like, you can't, that's not an answer, it's just love. But the last thing you said was, we just have to love people better.
Oh,
Sometimes I'm a hypocrite.
No, but it's just funny. But like the explanation behind the love, like, you know, people need to learn how to love sometimes. So I think it is important.
Yeah.
But once you boil it down, it's just like, you just love.
Yeah, and you operationalize how to love.
Yeah,
Right,
yeah.
right.
Like
You
as
gotta
you
operationalize how to love. I love that. It's love, man. It's all love.
Yeah, all you need is love.
All you need is love.
Love is all you need.
So, I really enjoyed this episode.
This is great.
Yeah. Any other final thoughts?
All you need is love is good.
I'll add that, like, I am so grateful to be a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I'm grateful for the way I've been stretched. I'm grateful for the way I've had to, like, look towards God and make personal decisions and have conflict with friends and family members. Like, I'm really grateful for it because it's helped me grow. And, you know, the pain's not always a bad thing.
Yeah, and I used to be in this place of like I would just give people answers and explain things and not mourn with them and do those things. And I'm grateful for the growth I've had in recent years that has really stretched and pulled my faith and made me look to God in deeper ways than I had before.
You're like one of those big taffies at the fair.
Yeah.
I can see that. And I'm just grateful for both of you all's journeys. I mean, like on the ground as a therapist, there's so many people that, I mean, you know, they look up to you guys, or they're looking for past the follow people to think about just trying to make things more concrete in their lives. And so it's just a special point of bravery to be able to share like tensions and questions and things that you haven't figured out. So I just have a lot of appreciation for you too.
Oh, thank you, Kimberly. And we're so thrilled to have you on today. Thank you for joining us.
Fun personality.
Thank you.
I love it.
I am fun.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us today. If you have enjoyed this or other episodes, please consider leaving a review, following us on Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube at Questions from the Closet, or sharing this podcast with someone you love. And as always, please remember that we do not represent the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints or Brigham Young University. We're not trying to be prescriptive or tell anyone what to think or what to do.
You heard 3 perspectives, and there are many, many more. We encourage you to listen to other voices and hear a wide variety of experiences. If you would like to submit a question or share a comment about today's episode, you can email us at questionsfromthecloset@gmail.com.
Until next time.